What is adaptive government? How does adaptability differ from resiliency? What can government agencies do to become more adaptive? I'll explore these questions and much more with Nick Evans, author of the IBM Center Report, A Guide to Adaptive Government, Preparing for Disruption. So, Nick, why is disruption now the rule and not the exception today? And would you describe for us what you mean by disruption and what you mean by business as disrupted?
Yes, certainly. So I think we're all familiar with the term business as usual. And for many decades, we've felt like we operate business or we operate government, and there's a steady state playing field, and we're just operating where we have operating principles, procedures, processes, and we're just running the business, and it's just business as usual. Well, I think with the state of disruption now, as we look at any type of disruption, whether it's business disruption, disruption from pandemics, extreme weather, geopolitical forces, whatever the disruption, we're now seeing it becoming not really the exception, but more the norm, right? So what it's doing is it's putting pressure on this old notion of doing business as usual. We're now moving into an era where we really need to think about how do we do business as disrupted in an environment, an external environment where the business is continually disrupted almost day by day.
Excellent. Yeah. And your report, A Guide to Adaptive Government, Prepare for Disruption, you introduce the concept of a government adaptive enterprise. And I was wondering if you could help us. What do you mean by that in the context of your report and your research?
Yes, certainly. I think the notion of adaptability is something that really hasn't gained a lot of attention. So there's been a lot of effort and focus on obviously things like sustainability and resiliency. And there's a very large body of work around that. And these are desirable things that, organizations, government, business, everyone wants to be sustainable. You want a resilient business, a resilient organization, a resilient infrastructure. But really the hypothesis around the research is that adaptability can be actually the cornerstone to achieving these sustainability and resiliency goals, as well as a number of other desirable strategic goals for a city or even a country. And so when we think about adaptability, the really interesting thing there is you're dealing with both threats and opportunities. So where resiliency is really a risk management strategy, and it's only dealing with managing risk, when you think about adaptability, we're now dealing with both risk management as a strategy, but also it's a strategy for innovation. So it's really all about how do we maximize the productivity of a city, of a government agency or a business through these ups and downs of disruption. Not just risk management and resiliency, but really innovating both through the threats and the opportunities that the business faces.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You take the concept that you outlined in the report and just explained. I want to see how you can apply it to government and what is meant by adaptive government, and how does this concept or this characteristic of intrinsic agility factor into adaptive government?
Sure. So I think the main premise is having adaptability, having an adaptive government or an adaptive enterprise. The reason you do that is because you want to react to change. And it's far better to actually do it with intrinsic agility, bake that ability to change into the organization versus, scratching your head and saying, gee, things have changed in the outside world. Now I need to take a month or 6 months to figure out how do we react to that. So it's a much more proactive approach. Instead of dealing with change after the fact, what we're doing with intrinsic agility and this idea of adaptive government is we're building that ability in, we're engineering it in to the way the organization operates. So it's part of the DNA of the organization. And a really good example I like to give is the military's DEFCON system. That's been around obviously for decades. But if you think about the military and the state of readiness, we don't know as a nation or as the military forces, we don't know what's happening tomorrow, in a week's time, in a month's time, or even in the next few minutes. But because we have the the DEFCON system, if you will, or frameworks like that, you have a set of predefined operating procedures and postures that you can jump to very quickly. So that's the whole idea of having that readiness built in, pre-rehearsed, pre-trained. Everyone knows the role, and you can quickly kind of jump to that modality. So that's kind of an actual practical example of, putting adaptability into the military in this case.
That's an excellent example of its practical application. Nick, I was wondering about the role. What role does digital transformation take in realizing the vision of adaptive government?
Yeah, I think it's actually many people think digital transformation is kind of the end game, right? We all want to digitally transform and it's the solution to respond to change. Well, actually, if you think about it, transformation is a continuous journey. So that's why we've been on the digital transformation bandwagon for probably more than 10 years now. All the press, the media, we're always talking about digital transformation. But the trouble with transformation, you're never there because whatever you're transforming to, it's usually the current state, and the future's never fixed. So that by the time you transform, things have changed, and you've got to transform again. So this whole idea is that digital transformation is only the first step, but to really get to the vision of the adaptive government, you've got to bake in this intrinsic agility and use adaptability to solve for change as part of the business or the operating model instead. So it's kind of really if you think of a future vision where government works really well in all of its people, processes, and technology, step one might be digital transformation, but really step two and the end game, and I think what comes after digital transformation, is really this idea of the adaptive government.
You do a wonderful and necessary job of distinguishing adaptive systems from resilient systems. And sometimes in the popular parlance, popular imagination, they're used interchangeably, and that's not necessarily a good idea. They're two different concepts. I was hoping you could explain for us the difference between them, and more importantly, how do they differ philosophically as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's interesting. A resilient system is almost completely the opposite of an adaptive system. So the resilient system, what it's trying to do is just recover. It goes back to that whole business as usual discussion that we had earlier, business as usual versus business as disrupted. So the resilient system, what it wants to do is recover or regain its authentic form as quickly as possible. So that these kind of resilient systems, they're often very brittle. They're one size fits all. They're trying to restore or maintain the steady state, and they have a risk management philosophy. Now, if you take an adaptive system, what it's doing is it wants to have that intrinsic agility to continuously maximize value by rapidly reconfiguring itself all the time. So what it's doing is it's continuously optimizing. It's not just a one-time restoration to get back to steady state, but the adaptive systems continuously, reading the environment and optimizing for ambient conditions. So it's flexible, it has multiple configurations instead of one size fits all. And it's really built on an innovation philosophy as opposed to a risk management philosophy.
Excellent. So, Nick, to put adaptive government or adaptive enterprise into action, and let's stay within the government context, if you don't mind. Departments and agencies should take what you have outlined in your report as a phased iterative approach. I was hoping you could tell us more about this approach and how you came up with it.
Sure, and it's basically it's a three-phased approach, and I think as we go through the discussion today, we'll kind of dive into each one. But basically, at the top level, obviously, we need to kind of set that strategy and vision. What do we mean by adaptability? Let's get that defined, an adaptive first mindset, and kind of developing a strategy for adaptability. Step two is to kind of design and build for adaptability. So this is where we pull in those physical and digital enablers, the tools in the toolkit, and start to put them to work, right? And we pull them in and start developing these newer systems, or maybe we're just enhancing an existing system to make it more flexible. And then finally, what we're doing is really kind of operating with the same mindset. So we're continuously innovating. We're innovating for the unknowns. We have that trend radar, and we're detecting not only emerging tech, but we're looking at those pestle forces that are going to come in the years ahead. And then we're constantly figuring out ways to kind of accelerate the innovation cycle. So it's kind of a loop, a circle with basically strategy and vision, design and build, and then operate with continuous innovation. And it's kind of a feedback loop, but all focused on adaptability.
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Nick Evans, author of the IBM Center Report, A Guide to Adaptive Government, Preparing for Disruption. You can get this and all Center reports at businessofgovernment.org. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Podcast One, iTunes, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.